Miguel Conner is here with me discussing his latest book. And this is a book about Elvis. And there's so many different ways to discuss what this means and what it doesn't mean. So I have no idea where this is going to go. But first of all, thank you so much, Miguel. What is the name of the book so people can find it?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. James True host. Here's Miguel Conner guest. The tables have switched. The hunter has become the hunted. But yeah, always good talking to you, man. And the book is called The Occult Elvis.
That's right. Now, this is a very crucial take, honestly, on the king, because for so long we're watching, in my estimation, we're watching mythology being built inside of our lifetimes. So we actually have the opportunity to see a real character being turned into what will eventually be an archetypal mythos. And I'm wondering if you consider this to be an exaggeration, or could you expand on this idea at all?
No, not at all. I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, we already knew that Elvis was as close as it came to symbolizing what is America, what is reaching the heights of being an American and the lows too, the shadow side. And yeah, Elvis, we always knew Elvis was as American as apple pie. But the question is, yes, you and I do a lot of work on mythology. And when does that myth actually start working for the people, working for our psyche? That's what's important. When does it really start rejuvenating the soul of a tribe and so forth? And I think that's what the book does that beyond showing like the hidden occult life of Elvis that's hidden in plain sight. I mean, it's all in the biographies and everywhere else. It does show this myth of Elvis in different levels. I try to show it. Through the lens of Jung, through the lens of Steiner, through the lens of alchemy, through the lens of Joseph Campbell, to show this figure and how he's transcended basically the world and so forth. And I feel this is my hope is that it is very helpful to people. We both know without a myth, a people will die
That's
eventually.
right.
And I think Elvis really represents what it is to be an American and what it is to be America. And as this country starts to fray away and fragment, doesn't know its identity, I think this book is could help get us there. And I do show at the end, this is Elvis's our last hope and to be an American. I don't go on a listicle of what it is to be Elvis, but I hope the reader can gain that experience.
Yeah, it's so easy for us being on the other side of Elvis. In other words, after the image is actually sort of set in stained glass to have an image, but really Elvis was the one who's forging this image. And one of the things I loved about the book was I was watching a mythology come to life. I was watching this golem of spirituality formulate around him. And it really wasn't the necessarily the story that I thought, at one of which Elvis is discovered. In a lot of ways, Elvis discovered himself. He brought himself into the limelight, which is a little bit of a different path than people might have imagined. And it really hits true, I think, with this idea that mysticism comes from inside of ourselves. Even watching the entourage, his family, his fans, in addition to the cultural icons, you're looking at people that honestly are looking at something mortal and then they're changing their belief in midstream and realizing this is something they're divine, that's divine. And nowhere along the way is anyone actually disagreeing with this. In fact, because I need to get better at asking you a question, I just seriously, this book just blew my mind, Miguel. But let me really phrase this in the sense of even at his birth, the idea that Elvis was a divine twin and spent 35 minutes in the womb, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but right after his older brother basically perished, for him to remain in that Stargate, to have all of the suicidal guilt or survival guilt, excuse me, that comes along with these things instantly thrust on you the moment you enter the earth seems to have been a catalyst And I'm wondering, is this catalyst something that was preordained, or do you think the actual act itself sort of christened Elvis to emerge in this just strange explosion or fireworkal kind of life?
That's a good question, and certainly a question I struggle, as you said, in real time with the book as I'm writing it. Fate, destiny. Is it all written in the stars? Can we do anything about it? And Elvis certainly exemplifies it. Even before the tragic death of Jesse, you had the blue light appear over his house, with the herald to the historic figures, whether it's Jesus, Alexander the Great, Buddha. He had this blue light come out that his father saw Vernon and freaked out about. And then there's a story, might be apocryphal, but again, when you and I talk factual, yeah, it takes kind of a second seat for a while. But there were two figurines on the shelf, and one figurine fell as soon as Gladys went into labor.
Wow.
So you already had that fate. Yes, Jesse came out stillborn, and I always just try to picture the look of Gladys and Vernon and the family. They couldn't afford a doctor, because it was the Great Depression, 1935 in Mississippi, in their little shack. Imagine the the anxiety they must have had, the tension. But then Elvis came out, and yes, he survived, and I talk about in the book. Yeah, there's many mythological ways you can look at it. Obviously, you've done so much work on the twin, so you already have that. Blue, you and I have talked. You've written books about the
Yeah.
power of blue. So even when I was writing this book, I was like, oh, James True, James True. I bet he's all right. He'll be happy with these sections. And
Yeah.
the twinless survivor is, nobody knew about it back then. It was kind of like, he won't remember.
Mm,
He'll be fine. And his mother never really talked much about it. Wouldn't go visit the grave. Would say something like he's with God now.
mm.
Elvis had to go by himself with his father to visit the grave. But there is that phenomena called the twinless survivor, where the twin is forever changed and lives with this sort of guilt, survivor's guilt. They wonder about what happened. Elvis always asks, why did I survive?
Right.
Why did he live? Twinless survivors are seekers. They want the bigger questions of life, like why God did this to me, and so forth. And they are very spiritual people, but at the same time, there's always a curse with the gift, right?
That's right.
So twinless survivors tend to be they're workaholics, they're self-destructive, and they are prone to addiction. And one chapter, and we can get into, I compare Elvis to Philip K. Dick, another twinless survivor who
Right.
had the same characteristics as Elvis. Both are history changing figures, but both passed too young and were tormented by their twin, by drugs, by even destructive relationships, another aspect of a twinless survivor. And so we go into this. Yeah, was this fated from the beginning? Seems like it. It seems Elvis was meant to be Elvis.
Yeah, it really does. It would almost seem like it would be impossible to have I'm going to use this term loosely, but a moon child without these sort of events to kind of really tune the person and throw them into that light. Of course, Rome itself found on twins. One of the twins is immortal, the other is mortal.
Hmm.
And here you have, although you might accuse me of twisting this, I don't think I am, because you have one twin that because he is stillborn, he actually is only immortal. So there's the immortality part of the twin alongside this other one that suckled on the outlaw rage of living in the South, of breaking through literally every single norm as if it didn't even exist. And I think this is one of the things that people don't even know yet about Elvis is just how many paradigms he was able to completely decimate, leave completely in the dust, and suggest that there's a whole new way of being that's built on this religion, but also built on the natural sort of timber of the soil around him, the rhythm and the blues. I was fascinated to read about rock and roll, actually that term being related more to the idea of comfort. Could you educate us a little bit on that part?
Yeah, one of the arguments, another argument I make in the book, and again, this is was noticed by many people. It was noticed today by the work of Chris Knowles, but even in the 50s, was that rock music was more like a holy tent revival when it first started by critics. They couldn't, they're like, these Pentecostals have replaced Holy Spirit with baby. And it really was a form of spirituality, and it makes sense when you look at individuals like Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, Elvis, guys who came out of Memphis in that area. They were pastors first before there were musicians. That's how people saw them.
Mm.
And if you go even further back, the term rock and rolling meant when you were in a Pentecostal church and you went into the altar state of mind and you went down into the aisles and started, freaking out. It was called rock and rolling. And rock music really was this fusion of gospel music, experiential gospel music, shamanistic Christianity, if you would. And of course, as I write, the devilish blues, which is based on African animism, the trickster, a myth, the left hand path kind of a world. And these two fused together and Elvis, and really culminated with Elvis. Elvis himself said, "I carry heaven and hell with me, and I have to be careful." So
Mm.
when you look at rock music as a form of spirituality that came out of the crossroads, that came through the crossroads of post World War II America, it really starts to make more sense, and it really makes sense in even in our daily lives. I mean, when we go to concerts, well, and I don't care if it's, Taylor Swift or the Grateful Dead, we are there in a shamanistic experience with these forces. These forces help us know ourselves. This figure, the shaman, has seen our pain and can heal us, and we're there to create an egregore and sort of go start rock and rolling, go in an altered state of mind. So that's another one. If we can see rock music for what it was, a form of spirituality, not entertainment, and a form of again, a modern form of shamanism, it makes more sense and it's more useful.
Yeah. Even the concept of the blues, of course, there's all the references to Elvis utilizing blue in some way in his color schemes and his music, and even as you mentioned earlier, at his birth itself, the blue haze that was apparently emanating from the house, is this idea of learning to find joy in what is sad. This is a deep psychological sign of growth for the psychology of man to find joy in sadness. And so it seems to me that this is really part of his magic, is that he was bringing, as you said, heaven and hell really is just simply a frequency that has a higher ceiling than you could ever imagine and a lower floor than you could ever imagine. So the fact that he aligned with blue, I think, just really fits this mode of punching through colors that people really hadn't learned to perceive in such a soulful, spiritual way before. So this really is the transformative shamanic nature of music that you're talking about. It's the reason why festivals feel so much better when you're on the grounds and you're
Yeah.
walking around. You're living inside of that egregore, and it's very, very palatable. With all this said, I had no idea that Elvis even knew who Manly P. Hall was. Like, he actually, out of all the people that Elvis would know, this is a guy that not only did he know, but he seemed to look up to. Can you give us a little bit into that friendship and how that could even work?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, Manly P. Hall was kind of the goat in the 50s, 60s,
Mm.
and 70s in American occultism and the rise of the American New Age. And when Elvis became really absorbed into the esoterica in the early 60s, he was off to the races. And we all are that. Oh my God, I discovered something new. I'm going to buy all these books on Amazon. The difference is that he got all these books and he would read them, he would study them, he would practice the exercises of Yogananda or Madame Blavatsky. But Manly P. Hall was a huge part of him. He read all of his books, The Secret Teaching of the Ages, The Mystical Christ, all that, and he just loved the mythological aspects of the Hall. He loved the way Hall portrayed Jesus in a more, again, mythological, cosmic
Mhm.
sense. And it really helped Elvis develop his own ideas of who Jesus was and what his role is. And they almost met. Before that, he knew that if he showed up to Manly P. Hall's lectures in L.A., it would be chaos, right? Because wherever Elvis went, it was always again the Maenads would appear, right? It would become a Dionysian festival, and chaos would ensue, and all that. So that's why he stopped going to church in the 50s because he just couldn't do it.
Mhm.
So he would send Priscilla down to go and sit there, listen to his lectures, and write notes, and bring him, and he'd be like, "Ah, this is great. This is great." One time he was there recording in LA in the early 70s. He asked his spiritual teacher Larry Geller, "Can you get me a book?" He went there and Larry Geller shows up and the secretary's like, "Oh my God, no, he's too busy today. Can't see anybody." Larry's like, "Well, Elvis wants a book signed." And the secretary went to Hall and Hall's like, "Cancel everything. Sure, I'll do it." Got him a book, signed it, got it to Elvis, and Elvis was so happy. In fact, he went to record at the studio that day, and he drove all the studio musicians crazy because he'd be like, instead of working, "Oh, what do you guys think about the cosmic order? Or what do you think about this myth?" And they're like, "Dude, let's record this album." And there was a time again, Elvis was obviously very busy again, typical workaholic. Was also in LA and he had a little bit of time and he's like, he called Manly P. Hall, said, "Can we meet?" Hall was like, "Of course, I'd love to meet you, but I don't break my appointments. I have important appointments, so I can't push anything." So unfortunately, they didn't meet. But yeah, Hall was definitely one of the big influences on Elvis once he embraced
Yeah.
the occult, whatever it is. That word still bothers people when I go to radio stations, James. I don't, what do we call it? I don't know what to call
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I think that's the charge itself of the message. And so, yeah, it's supposed to be expensive for people to hear terms like that. Otherwise, the word esoteric would lose its meaning entirely. The last thing we need is Elvis popularizing esoterica. That would make it disappear, right? So,
Yeah,
so
and,
these
and
the
when
divine
I
will is
went to
working.
Graceland, and the tour guide, very nice young lady, and she's this and that, and she knew that a lot of his books on the occult are there to be seen,
Hmm.
and some are open. You see the title, you see Elvis's scribble writing notes, and so of course he's like, "Oh, by the way, was very spiritual." So that's the word that doesn't cost people
There you
any,
go.
it doesn't cost the 50-year-old Australian women who came to Memphis, Tennessee. And of course, you go to his garden with his grave, and it's got all his Buddhist, Taoist trappings
Yeah.
and all that. So interesting how we navigate these words, right, James?
Yeah. In fact, Elvis really would be nothing without disciples. And I'm using this term very loosely, from his fans to his entourage to even his Edward Kellyan relationship with Geller. These are scrying devices, the people around him. And when you're following the king, for example, Manly P. Hall showed a lot of backbone by saying, I can't skip my appointments."
Right.
However, he also still showed the tremor of Elvis by stopping what he was doing to be sure he gave him a signed copy. It really does show you the force of Elvis itself. And I'm bringing this around because I want to read John 14:12. This is correct me if I'm wrong, Miguel, but this was Elvis's, you might could argue, one of his favorite Bible verses. Maybe that's not the right way to say it, but let me just read this for everyone.
Sure, sure.
"Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father." First of all, do you want to correct me on his
No.
relationship to that verse?
Yeah, yeah, no, spot on. The Gospel of John was always his favorite text in the entire Bible. Of course, as I write, it's originally a Gnostic text that the Gnostics adopted and then was
Right.
taken away. And he loved all about it. But that text was important because as I show in the book, and again, I'm not using any tabloids or weird websites or anything like that. This is all from, Priscilla, spiritual teachers, bodyguards,
Mhm.
girlfriends, all that, family members. Elvis had the ability to do all these incredible magic, not performances, not even tricks, but supernatural powers
Yes.
like healing people, manipulating the weather, making objects move, and other things, astral travel, altered states of mind. Almost, he had power to read people's aura. So, and a lot of people were like, that have told me, well, why didn't he just do that in Vegas or something, or tell everybody, I am Elvis the King now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am like that James Dio song, Stargazer. I am the king of the world, or something like that. But he was taught from Yogananda that your supernatural abilities are only useful insofar that they show you're getting closer to the divine. You
Yeah.
are individuating. That's all they mean. You're not meant to solve world hunger or anything like that. And
Yeah.
Jesus does the same. He doesn't call them miracles, he calls them signs. Because when Jesus is doing these things, he's just telling people the kingdom of God is near me. God is
Mhm.
near me. So I think that's an important thing because some people have told me they're angry. He should have shown the world his powers. I'm like, no, that wasn't how the game is played with these
Yeah.
mystics.
This actually was part of the original point of me saying that a Messiah is nothing without his disciples. And I think the book really expertly navigates this truth, which honestly is why occultism has such a freaky name. And I'll just say it. A cult is built on the hiding of how something actually works. It's part of what gives it so much magic. And when you have an entourage of people that believe in Elvis even half as much as he believes in himself, even a quarter as much as he believes in himself, you're going to create a very powerful engine of belief around that. And so when I'm listening to your stories as Elvis is melting clouds, and then he's insisting that everyone wait because we're going to make the clouds come back because it
Mhm.
was so important to him that he was trying to separate. In my opinion, this is what I read into it. I think Elvis was wise enough to understand that his disciples weren't exactly like the cleanest slate when it came to giving him raw, authentic feedback all the time. And it seemed like I would catch him sometimes trying to even convince himself because of so much torque that's been placed on him by everyone else. So the methods of which he would heal people, the methods that he would see into someone or notice things about them were truly fueled by the group consciousness itself.
All
And
right.
this is really ultimately what makes an archetype. The archetype is lifted up above all human capability and given this supernatural light, which honestly puts him in a place where there's nowhere else to go but up. There's
Mhm.
no coming down from this cross. You could call it a pedestal or a cross, but it really is the exact same instrument. So it ends up being a collective device, a device by a corporation of Elvis. This would
Mhm.
be every single person that would want to see the power of his supernatural ability. And I think ultimately it comes down to the idea of what true magic is, because it seems to be a welding bubble of belief
Mhm.
where if you have enough people focusing their prana into this central oxygen free environment, you can melt steel. And Elvis Presley seems to have done that very thing.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, he obviously had his natural power, but he needed those that were there. He needed to tap into the blue light. He always talked about just when he was with the audience, there was this electricity with
Mhm.
the audience, and it was the greatest feeling ever. And it's a pity. I was thinking we don't have that many. There's a very little concert footage of Elvis when you think about it, but the way the crowd would act and just it was, yeah, it was a very powerful shamanistic experience. It's like And that's why he was he's probably the only rock star that ever he sold out every concert he ever booked, whether it was a
Hmm.
small hall, the Houston Astrodome, Vegas, he always sold out every concert. He always had, again, his tribe and his disciples there for this very important and healing ritual that was
Yeah.
rock music.
And it had such a spiritual overtone to it that it seemed like Elvis himself even struggled with that about how much do I incorporate this? How little do I incorporate this? I could be reading into this, but you would describe his, I believe it was Captain Marvel, the original blue suit with the lightning bolt on it as being sort of an original inspiration. Of course, you and I think, automatically go to Elvis in the white suit, the much more shamanistic Quetzalcoatl sort of role.
Right, right.
And in my mind, I was seeing that because it was his innocence as a child. It was Elvis's innocence as a child that gave him, I think, enough permission to pull this much torque, to pull this much belief from everyone. And he was doing that from purely just the joy of the superhero, not necessarily the staunch Catholical nature of a smoky lit pope that's been declared. So that kind of playfulness, I'm wondering if you think this has something more to do with all the lines that he blurred, whether it be not just through sexuality, but even through gender. This guy was doing things that quite frankly were causing a lot of pain, a lot of anguish, as the culture was watching him just break through these glass barriers, just one after the other, day after day, with zero penalties at all. What do you think about this?
Yeah, he was almost a nuclear bomb in a nuclear age, and certainly the gender identities and roles were forever changed here in the United States and in the West. He really woke up the Kundalini of women and showed them not just their sexual power, but their intellectual power, just their power in general. And he showed men how to soften, that men could be soft and vulnerable. In other words, no longer was it Gary Cooper, the chiseled tough guy that was the alpha male, but it was Marlon Brando and Elvis, this soft, sensitive guy. We used to call them metrosexuals. Remember, James, in another era?
That's
That's what
right.
it was. The guy who was
Yeah.
completely in tune with his femininity and could connect with women and knew more as much about makeup as women, but he was still predominantly heterosexual. And
Yeah.
Elvis really shattered all of those things. Again, he really was the ultimate symbol of the androgyne, the power
Yes.
of the anima, the animas, the all the polar again, heaven and hell. He represented it, and we know in mythology that is the supreme state of any sort of consciousness, the androgyne. Elvis was certainly androgynous, and yeah, he didn't. It was so he was just like lightning. It was hard to pay a price. I mean, he was attacked by jealous boyfriends and husbands. There were threats. All that. That's why he learned martial arts in the 50s when nobody had heard of it here in the United States. That's why he carried guns, at least 4 or 5 guns in his person, and all that. And of course, the evangelical Christianity that he was part of denounced him, turned on them. Billy Graham was public
Yes.
about it. His own pastor said he was possessed by Satan, and he was completely burned by it and very pissed off. That's one of the reasons he eventually became more open to the occult, because he was like, you guys are just a business. You're not really, you're not practicing what you preach. I've always been a good moral person, and F you. And there are other things, he couldn't reconcile the idea of eternal damnation and other issues that sort of led him to that. But yeah, he again, I call him the Lord of the Crossroads. This is the crossroads where he
Mm.
had gender and sexuality completely transformed after the 50s and into the 60s, as many public figures have said. Elvis really seeded the spirit of the 60s through his interest in occultism, mysticism, his androgynous powers, his love for multicultural music. He was really so impactful. Again, the identity of America really starts, or
Yeah.
post-war America starts with Elvis.
Yeah. You could look at Elvis separated fertility from sexuality. In other
Bingo.
words, he turned what used to be, right, strictly an act of creating basically slave hands, to help you on the farm, and discovered that there was a real joy and salvation just in these feelings themselves, just in these kind of tones, and truly I think that's ultimately what ends up being his appeal is that he was firing constellations in the mind that had never been triggered before. Those
No.
subtle hues between the fertility and the sexuality that obviously have strived to come out, but have also go through eras where they're just beaten down to a pulp, and so it kind of lends mix to what happens next. And of course, if you're a surfer like Elvis, you're going to be right there in line, waiting for that. With all
Yeah.
that said,
But before you go on, yeah, with Elvis, I think it was the first time, I don't know, even in history, where women could openly objectify men.
hmm,
The thing was switched. It was for perfectly fine. It was healthy. He was also called a safe sex hero because, again, he could be beamed down in televisions and movies, and women, I'm sure plenty of men could simply just, mentally masturbate to
yes,
his body and it'd be fine. It was healthy. It was good. It was an exploration of your inner self. And as critics said, the term teenager didn't even exist until the 50s. It was
wow,
this no man's land between adulthood and childhood, and suddenly you were a kid, and then suddenly, oh, you got to go work at the farm or get a job. And with the 50s and Elvis leading it, suddenly we find this middle ground, this Bardot called a teenager that can play with with these energies and everything. Of course, it helped. This was Eisenhower America, because there was a lot of money and a lot of teenagers had suddenly had a lot of money and a lot of power, and they
right,
they were heard. They were like, we don't like this brave new world.
yeah,
Yeah, we're out of World War II, we're out of the Great Depression, but my God, there's UFOs and satellites in the
mhm,
sky. What's this red threat? Oh, the Chinese and the Russians. What's
yeah.
all this mass media and highways being built? And they were like, this is a really freaky science fiction world, and we don't know what to do. Well, Elvis comes with rock music, this new spirituality, this theology of liberating your sexuality and your soul, and he leads this new generation into America for, better or worse. Better or worse. I don't make judgment calls. I just say this is
Well,
history.
it does seem as if every time you look back at American history, there's an explosion in new consciousness, and then there's an out and out revolt against that, and then there's
Yeah,
an explosion in consciousness, and it repeats.
yeah.
And it's so hard for us, especially now in today's world. I watch a lot of people complaining about what's happening even now, and I can't help but think this is probably exactly what Elvis heard all the time. Just it was just all around him. Things that are just simply not understood would be another way of looking at just strong energy that's so strong and new that frankly, people just don't even know what to do with it. This really is what makes Elvis turn divine. The guy hasn't been dead that long, and since I was a kid, I've been hearing, no, he's not dead. He's still alive, and it's shown me that this is the mythological on ramp into the divine mystic, into the prophet itself. The fact
Hmm.
that people are insisting that he is still alive, I would even have a hard time arguing against that simply because he's still such a strong tone in culture. He's still there. So even when we start to define what existence really is, I think Elvis is just showing you that these people that we call prophets are simply people that were able to ignite the constellations of our mind in ways that have never before been felt. And so we would have to look at them as living forever. It's the only way to justify us giving that much real estate in our mind for something so important like that.
Yeah, perfectly said. I mean, is Jesus dead? Is King Arthur dead? Is Buddha dead?
Right.
Not really. They are still around in some way. They're still part of us, and in many ways, they're certainly more alive than ever. And Elvis certainly is more alive than ever. Even with the recently the sad passing of Val Kilmer.
Hmm.
And you think you ever watched the movie True Romance? And True
Hmm.
Romance is one of those. part of our generation, that pivotal era, the Tarantino grunge era, where we culture shifted forever. And there's that scene where Val Kilmer plays Elvis, and he's telling, the protagonist, the Slater, Christian Slater protagonist, go shoot this guy, go shoot, you got to be a man and all that. And it's in the book, but it's really one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Even when I was not an Elvis fan, when I was a Beatles fan, I always thought
Yeah.
that is America, that is badass, that is
Yeah.
being a man.
Yeah. Watching the binary of your Elvis or Beatles, even try and survive now on such a full spectrum of different things that we have, kind of is just another homage to what Elvis unleashed. Is by unwinding this spectrum, we just have so many more choices now to choose from, and this is why we choose sci-fi. This is why we choose all the crazy things that we have in our mind, because these things have been opened up to us.
Mhm.
Um, I think Elvis had some mommy issues, Miguel. I think he
Yeah,
had,
the most powerful archetype, huh?
yeah, I think he had like a lot of mommy issues.
But we all do. There's no way around it.
No,
There's
that's not
no way
true.
around it.
That's not true, Miguel. You and I don't have mommy issues. I don't know why you're suggesting that. Can we end the interview right now?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
I hope that people have seen that I've given Elvis quite enough praise here. And that's why I've left this to the middle hump to see even how far this would go with Miguel. But the dude has some mommy issues, and I just want to bring up a few things and just see what you think. First of all,
Sure.
I got these from your book, so I'm just plagiarizing them from you.
Yeah, I don't yeah, I show both sides of
Yeah,
Elvis, the shadow and the
which I
dark
really
side.
appreciate that. So, it starts with the Vernon Triangle. Elvis's biological father was, for just in order so we can be quicker, a little bit faster here. He wasn't necessarily a strong patriarchal figure. We could
No.
probably agree with that.
Yeah, yeah, just a beta guy. Nice guy, but just
So
that's who he was.
you end up maybe with something sort of Oedipus complexy, like where the mother is falling in love with the patriarchal lead that does have the antenna for that kind of a thing. So she ends up with not only her child but a surviving child, the child that survived when it looked as if all things were not going well.
And then
So
she finds out she can't conceive. Imagine that.
this was before or after?
After they went to the hospital, she was told no more babies.
Wow.
Elvis
Yeah.
is it.
That's
Elvis
right.
is it.
So even in this way, literally every single way, it's almost like a Morgaine. I think that's her name. The Merlin. Anyway, the love
Morgana,
child.
yeah.
Yeah, the love child of Morgana, who's sent to hate on Arthur. It's you do have this setup where Elvis is thrust into the role of patriarch, even though he's a child. So
Hmm.
I think this is a big part of it, for sure. But it's not just that. His first song that really hit was "It's All Right, Mama." So you have that, maybe just a
Yeah.
coincidence, but still you have that. You have Elvis couldn't have sex with someone who had already conceived.
Right, right.
Did I
That
read that
was
right?
yes, then that was the downfall of Priscilla and him. That was it. As soon as Lisa Marie came out, Elvis couldn't
Yeah.
perform.
Th-
He
So
could perform in Vegas, just not in the Vegas
right,
suite.
right. But everyone can perform in Vegas because they have the technology.
All right.
Elvis slept with his parents due to sleepwalking, correct?
Terrible sleepwalker, terrible anxiety. That's at least the story. But yeah, Gladys certainly was very possessive. And I talk about lethal enmeshment, how destructive it is. It creates, again, we go to the twin. You've got Jesse always in Elvis's head guiding him, like Jane guided Philip K. Dick in dreams and visions. But then it's the child is then split more into the proxy spouse and the little naughty Hermes who can, he's trying to escape. And that's how he escapes the mother's oppression. And that, of course, did terrible damage to Elvis. Again, what are the side effects of lethal enmeshment? Bad relationships, prone to addiction, workaholism,
Mhm.
self-destruction. So it was all, again, the fate was all there, and her death was even more because that was everything to Elvis. And yeah, you mentioned Oedipus Rex, and I do make this analogy, and sometimes people miss it, but yeah, Oedipus was king. Oedipus was the rock star. He
Yeah.
defeated the Sphinx. Oedipus had some weird things with his mama. And what's the big story in Oedipus? Can we break out of fate? I think
Yeah.
you see it in the Egyptian mythology too, right, James? You've got what do you got? You got Isis, and then you've got who's the dad?
Horus. Well,
No,
well,
that's
Osiris. Yeah.
Osiris. Osiris. Then you got that.
Yeah, the
Horus
dead
appears,
father, right? So now
and
Horus has to perform. He has to be king,
Horus and
right?
Isis have to
Yeah.
be. I mean, there's the famous Hermetic text, the Koru Kasha. It's Horus and Isis working
Yeah.
religion and the fate of the
Yeah.
Hermetics. Osiris has been like Vernon. He's just been shelved,
That's
and
right.
so you see
And
it.
you have, which honestly led to the downfall of Egyptian religion because they're like, well, our main character is gone. This is creepy. Quick, someone invent something better. And so we do. But even back then, you really have the primal golden child being expressed on literally every single level. Not only is Elvis patriarch, not only is he the survivor twin, but he's also the youngest, which makes him an eternal innocent. A lot of times
Mm,
in the womb, the younger twin actually doesn't really perceive the world directly. They perceive it through the arms of their twin. So
mm,
it seems like the
yeah,
magic would be multiplied so much more because for that, that's his cipher. His cipher is now a ghost, an immortal ghost, and he's living in the shadow of that, trying to live up to the expectations. So it's a double
yeah,
whammy for Elvis to be a golden child, a golden sibling, and a golden child too. And as I said before, this is how you make a moon child, right? This is the magical
exactly.
formula. If people don't know what we're referring to, the idea that you could create a larger than life mystical character simply by aligning the planetary situation during conception, but also the psychological alignments that would occur during conception would lead to this mystical figure that is known all over the world. So it's a different kind of existence. And even as we are approaching this new society, this is ultimately what I where I want to go with what you're thinking is, Miguel, is because how does a constellation as big and bright as Elvis even get off the ground now? Is it possible? Is there even a way to do that if you just look at the intricacies of culture now, it not being necessarily on a singular branch? I'm wondering if we'll ever see an Elvis again.
No, I don't. Well, let me back up a little bit here because that's a good question. We can further unpack it. But first, I'd like to say it's interesting. Was it Phyllis Diller always used to say, if Jesse had lived, he'd be gay. And Philip K. Dick was always convinced that Jane would have been a lesbian.
Mhm.
So again, you got the androgyne, these opposing forces going with us. Now, the question of there, as soon as I was done with the book, I was like, oh my God, my 15 minutes of fame as a biographer is over. I can go back to writing books about Gnosticism or work on another. I was so happy. Another voice came and said, no, you forgot about Elvis 2.0. It's like, oh God, who could Elvis 2.0 be? And the image came to me and it said, oh, it's David Bowie. Said it can't be David Bowie. And I looked and I realized they're the same figure, same fate, same life, same destiny. I mean, some of it is on purpose. They actually met, they actually talked, they actually kind of worked together in their careers to sort of uh, bolster who they were. And when you look at David Bowie's impact and symbolism, it's just like Elvis, except I think Bowie is more of the British West Europe fall. The post-World War world was different. One was descending, one was rising, and Bowie's the one who sort of kept it there. So, but that's a book I'm working on, and I would say, yeah, Bowie is just it's amazing the parallels and connections. So,
Yeah, even
uh,
the lightning bolt is they have,
bingo.
yeah, yeah,
Both like Captain Marvel. I mean, you start realizing they were both into the same shit. Same, both were UFO fanatics. Both have UFO experiences. When you look at Ziggy Stardust, you go, "Oh my God, he is Elvis." And David Bowie actually said, we were doing the same jumpsuit and lightning bolt as Elvis. He was Bowie wanted to be the when he almost met Elvis at the start. He's like, well, he's a king of rock and roll. I'm going to be the queen of rock and
Mhm.
roll. And he's got to see how I'm younger than him. So fun kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an Elvis 3.0, but I do think that energy could help us because one of the another central point is that of the trickster. What does a trickster do? He leads us through doorways. The door hinges belong to Hermes.
Mhm.
In native culture, in European culture, the trickster is the one that leads a culture to its next incarnation, whether it's Loki and Ragnarok or other instances. He's the one that takes us through the crossroads. He's the one that allows us to alchemically change as a tribe. And I think Elvis did that in early 50s, and I think his spirit could help us do it as we
Mhm.
transition to whatever America's going to be next. Who knows,
Yeah.
you know?
If you consider the Bowie corollary, it reminds me of Guthrie and Dylan and Dylan's trek to basically pull the spirit out of Guthrie's dying mouth as he's on his deathbed to kind of be like, I will drink your mana
Yeah,
and go out and no offense to Dylan, but that's kind of what happened.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's making me wonder now, maybe the next incarnation of Elvis, this is probably way off topic, but maybe the next artificial incarnation of Elvis is actually artificial. Maybe it actually would require some sort of artificial amplification simply for it to share the same kind of impact. Like this is a base chakra change that Elvis gave everyone. Like your sentience about what the world is like
Mhm.
changed under this guy's shadow. And pulling something off that big when we have such a diverse consciousness now is going to take a lot of amplification, like a lot. So it's something needs to be above human, right? Metahuman itself.
Mhm.
And maybe artificial intelligence or an amalgamation of that. It's something I've been calling the Nimrod equation, which we probably shouldn't even talk about, but to quickly say, Elvis seemed to know this is what makes people rock. This is what makes people move.
Right.
And if you could harness that force, you're going to change society. And this ultimately is the archetype of Nimrod, someone who's creating something that is so appealing that people cannot help but build this tower, building this kind of thing, and it would appeal in the same root level of God. This feels good. This feels good. This is ultimately the power of Elvis, don't you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, he did appear as a hologram in Blade Runner 2, so he's already kind of making that move. But yeah, I mean, that's the opportunity again. What kind of egregore are we going to create? What kind of
Hmm.
alchemical lab are we going to work together? So I think so too. And above it should be again, what is the spirit of Elvis? As you know, the demigod of the American dream, or the representation, the egregore personification of the American dream. What's going to be next? And yeah, I haven't found an Elvis 3.0. When I finish the David Bowie book, I'll let you know. Sometimes I kind of, I ponder, was it Prince? I don't know. We
Mm.
don't know yet. It's
Yeah,
hard to
Prince is a
say.
good candidate.
He
He's
would be
also
a
got
good
the
hunter.
purple hue in there, so you still have the
No.
magic of the colors
Yeah, 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 for
building on
sure.
themselves. But yeah, it's really hard to picture uh how something could emerge, and it was just as hard back then, the day before Elvis saying it's all right mama, the day before that came out, it would have been just as impossible to picture then what we're having trouble picturing now, which truly is ultimately, the power of these figures, I think.
Yeah, he did come out of Sun Records. I mean, all the symbolism was there, and rock music was a kind of a sci-fi thing, you know. Bill Haley and the Comets. First rock and roll #1 hit was Rocket 88. Uh, and so it was all there, and it all seemed like it. Memphis. Can we get any more Egyptian magic than
Yeah,
that? I
totally.
mean, all the symbolism. He died at 42. Very powerful Egyptian symbolism. So all this I show in the book, how it was fated, how it happened, even through his death, it was all one big ritual of many rituals Elvis did. And somehow you and I talk, it keeps going back to the Egyptian magic. I think
Doesn't it
that's
always
we.
though?
Yeah, I know. So it's okay. Look over there, but I think that's where we end up, right? We either end up as reincarnations of Cleopatra, or we look at Egyptian magic, right?
Yeah. And Elvis, there's a play to El, the god of electricity. Just really quick, just to tell
Mhm.
people, what do you think about the origin of that name?
I think it's pretty unknown. There's many possibilities, like you said, El, the god, and what Elvis means, the God that stands alone and all that. And he looked it up. He was looking at all these
Yeah.
occult texts. Some of them are dated. I mean, we have to say Manly P. Hall, a lot of his scholarship is dated. It's just the way the world is. But he can never figure it out, and it's kind of unknown. So it will just have to remain as another mystery. And yeah, Captain Marvel was the electrical superhero, right? Shazam. And we can't forget that, yeah, comic books have inspired Elvis, like inspired a lot of us. But of all the superheroes that he liked, it had to be Captain Marvel because
Mhm.
he's this amalgamation of all these mythological figures, right? Solomon and Hercules and Atlas and all that. A wizard gives him his powers, and it's that very American trope. You've got this sort of working class kid that doesn't can't make a difference, and he is transformed into this godlike being that can help the world. So that was perfect for Elvis, and as I show in the David Bowie book, it was perfect for Bowie too.
Yeah. I really think one of the reasons why I love the childishness, I really mean this as a compliment of Elvis, is how excited he was when Nixon gave him a badge. Even though this guy had everything in the world, uh, being seen in this way as a crusader for a drug-free America, basically,
Yeah,
which is really ironic if you think about it.
it is.
But that was such a childhood joy for him, and I think ultimately this goes back to really what made him so magical, and which even ties in probably to how his mom would constantly allow and encourage. I don't see how he could have made it any other way without that encouragement to keep that innocence, to
Hmm.
maintain that love of music and the church and a way of connecting with each other. So that innocence theme seems to be a very necessary, a very important part of his divinity, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. Yeah, the wonder of this, and of course, not just Gladys, but having his father being thrown into prison, that leaves a scar. And you're wondering, how does a poor Southern boy in Mississippi have any rights where the law will work for him and all that? And when we read comic books, it's like, well, I'm not going to have the law work for me. I am the
That's
law.
right.
I will become the law, and I will have enough power. And he did things that defied logic, like once somebody stole some money. One of his workers stole some money for him in Vegas, and he and his posse. You can hear the banjo in the limousine. They're going to chase him to the airport, and they're all looking in the airport, and somebody says, "Well, he's in that plane that's taxiing down the runway." Most people would call the authorities, whatever. Elvis runs out into the middle of the tarmac and says, "Stop." And the pilot's like, "Holy mother God, Elvis is stopping me." Now, even in pre 9/11, it doesn't matter if it would have been Burt Reynolds or Elton John, they would have been arrested and it would
Mhm.
have made all the newspapers. Think about post 9/11. Taylor Swift would have been in Guantanamo Bay or
Mhm.
something.
Right, right.
So that they let him in, the pilot lets him in the place and he looks at the airplane. He's like, "Sorry, he's not here. I made a mistake." He gets out. That's it. Didn't make the papers. Nobody gets arrested. Or being able to go into an airplane one time without, he didn't have a wallet, and he walks up to the airport. He'd gotten mad at Gladys, Priscilla and Vernon, and he was pissed off at his life. He goes to the airport. He shows up. He's like, "Hi, I'm Elvis. I don't have a wallet." And the lady's like, "Oh, well, sure, we'll bill you." He gets to security. Of course, he's carrying all these guns. So security takes him back, and then security's like, "Elvis, you don't want to let go of your guns." He's like, "No, sir. Okay, give us an autograph and keep your mouth shut on the airplane, on the passenger airplane, and it's fine. Things that are, yeah, very childish, but only Elvis could get away with.
Yeah. Yeah, there's such your ego cannot be paying too much attention to pull that kind of torque in the room. Like you really do have to just be on another plane entirely. And once you have enough people around you that believe it too, I think you create a psychic engine, and that psychic engine is still alive today. We're literally talking about it right now. This idea of Gladys, I'm still wondering if she was a good mother or not. And I say that just because of all the interactions. For example, Elvis saw Gladys in Diamata, and Elvis saw Gladys in Priscilla, and
Yeah,
Elvis saw Gladys in Blavatsky. And
yeah.
this, you could not get a more broad range of visages, of female visages, for one guy to see his mother inside of. And so I think my final question to you, Miguel, and feel free to expand on this and anything else you think I might have missed, is do you think Gladys was a good mother?
Well, we have to try to have some understanding. Obviously, she was abusive, but that's, again, that's looking back. Stuff that our parents did to us would be considered abusive today, James. But at the time, an ass whooping that was just life. We didn't question it. Um, Obviously, the trauma of losing one of her children and then immediately finding out she could have other children. Of course, you almost can't blame her. Yes, Gladys was she was feared in Tupelo because she had extreme moods and she could be very manipulative. She had a witch blood about her. She could see things others can see and had premonitions. So that probably scared people too. So you have that. I mean, it is complex. She of course loved Elvis. She instilled a lot of good things. Elvis, like one of them, even when he was getting famous, was she would tell Elvis, under the eyes of God, we're all equal. Never judge anybody or think you are better than somebody else. So she did instill good ethics, good morals. But at the end of the day, she was, yeah, a very flawed person. And that's where also mentioned the deal with the devil, because Elvis didn't care about wealth, but he wanted his family to stop suffering. Not just his parents, but
Mhm.
cousins, uncles, his grandmother. So all that when he became famous, it was all for his family, specifically Gladys, that she would be taken care of forever. Gladys hated it with a passion because it meant her son is touring, he's out doing movies, they're no longer this tight-knit trinity, this Egyptian trinity anymore. Horus is out battling Set all the time in the
Right.
desert. And Isis is like, come on, man. Come on, man. And that really affected her health. She started to drink a lot, take too many diet pills and all that, and eventually it affected her health, and she passed. So Elvis had that second guilt, survivor's guilt, like,
Mhm.
yeah, I got famous, but that's what killed my mother. In fact, one time when Vernon and Elvis were in the hospital for two different things in the 70s, and they were talking, and Vernon let it out. He said, you worried your mother, she died because of you, all that, basically blaming Elvis for her death in the mid 70s. And you can see that did not help his psyche. That might have turned his health and his psyche even to go even
Sure.
down. Because it was always in the air, but this time your own father's denouncing you as a mama killer. So yeah, it's always complicated, these family dynamics. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, she was just trying her best like the rest of us.
That's right. It's such a beautiful way of even understanding the question is moot because being a good mother could mean so many different things to so many different people, and the ones who recognize Elvis as a mystical figure would find everything that was done to him, trauma wise or healthy wise, absolutely necessary for him
Hmm.
to be this. So really, it comes down to, was Elvis a good or a bad prophet, right? And it's the same question. You have the same kind of things, but I will say that out of everyone that I've seen go through the radiation of fame, Elvis really did, according to your book, really did seem to put a lot of effort into the spiritual rightness of what he was doing. He seemed to understand there was something a little bit too reverent there that needed more attention. Whether or not he did that appropriately, I don't think you could ever even know. But it did seem to be something that he focused on, and it's hard to argue that that's not a conscious person who is at least able to understand their footsteps and literally the damage or the movement or the changes that they're enacting on a society as a whole. Any final thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
No, you're right. I mean, his great quest was not money or fame, was to try to make contact with God, to
Mm,
try to understand the bigger questions in life. How did I get famous? What happened to Jesse, my mother? Why do people suffer? What is my role in this picture? Am I like Jesus and Mohammed and all these guys, or am I just an entertainer? It was all trying to make contact with God, which I think is the noblest thing you can, because like you said, making contact with God makes you consciousness. And he was really one of the most charitable human beings you could find. I mean, he saved lives, he paid for operation,
mm,
doctor visits, people who were homeless, people who were handicapped. I mean, he made what, in his 20 years, something, he made like $4 billion, adjust that for inflation. Huge amount of that money was all charity, local
mm.
synagogues, churches, police departments. I mean, you don't see that type of, billionaires don't do that. You know, he
Right.
was a philanthropist in the truest sense, where he would just write checks every day to people. Or if somebody sent him a letter that a girl was dying in a hospital, he once canceled his trip to go to Hollywood, and he drove to that hospital to hold that girl's hand that day. I mean,
Mhm.
again, if you're conscious and spiritual, you're going to do so well. So I do think he was one of those figures, and he struggled. He wondered, what is my role? And sometimes it doesn't work out. I mean, you look at many figures, spiritual figures, things don't end well for them, and they
Mhm.
do end up with doubt. Jesus in the garden, other figures, you look at Crowley, ended up broken down, drug addict. Krishnamurti, there's stories that he was very depressed. Alan Watts ended up an alcoholic. Who's the guy who did the Babylon working? Jack Parsons ended up broke in a drug addict. You know, these energies take effect, James. They
Yeah.
will take their part. We are built for the mystic experience, but our egos and our bodies are not. They're
Indeed.
not. So,
Yeah, it's not an accident that Elvis died from. I have this hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is basically a giant heart,
mhm,
just a heart too big for his frame.
mhm.
And he spilt that blood well across history, culture, all those things. Miguel, thank you so much for coming and talking to me. Let me try and interview you. Really enjoyed the book. I encourage everyone to check it out, and looking forward to this possible sequel too. So, any final words for us before we sign off?
No, you did a great job as a host. And yes, we've only just begun, as Karen Carpenter said. There's so much in the book that is left. I'm still getting downloads. People are emailing me with extra stuff about Elvis's powers and what he did. So there's much more to be said, and the story will continue to unfold. And of course, I'd love to talk to you more about it for sure.
Right on. Well, thank you much, Miguel. We will sign off here. Appreciate you being here.